I'm here from Houston, that middle that we were talking about earlier. So I'm not sure if it's morning or afternoon, but where we come from, it doesn't matter. You can say howdy. So I'm not going to give you the split the difference. So howdy, everybody. Howdy. Weak. Come on. Howdy? Howdy. Better. All right, thank you. So Apache Corporation, energy company. We've been in existence for 60 plus years. Based in Houston, Texas, but as you can see, operations around the globe. That portfolio is a constant evaluation and state of change. We operate in different parts of the world today than we did 5 years ago, than we did 10 prior to that. But what has been constant is the appetite and the demands on the operations that we sustain, being safe, being efficient, and being profitable. So we live within those changes as the portfolio changes, but the mission is the same. And we work every day to bring safe and affordable energy to the rest of the world, not just where we operate, but worldwide. So alongside that, we've developed a very, I'd call it, yeoman-like approach to working with data over the years. We have lots of operations in lots of places. We have lots of questions that are being asked and lots of operational imperatives to meet. But from the standpoint of how do we feed that back to the rest of the organization, it has been very steady, very methodical, and very directed toward the thing that's the most tangible, the thing that's most available. So that's great when you have a fairly steady, fairly predictable business behind you. And as everybody knows, the energy industry has not necessarily been that simple, flat line for quite a while. So where do you go? How do you take that next step toward being alongside your business, being helpful to them, but also pushing them forward based on the data that they need to see? When we looked at that from an Apache standpoint, we had to really gut check ourselves. We had to look at what was missing or what would be the most additive, most influential, most powerful part of moving that forward as the business continues to evolve. We began discussing things with Palantir in the sense of what could this be like? And some references earlier to some of the facets of that partnership discussion, but lots of long whiteboard discussions, lots of arm wrestling, lots of what ifs, lots of let's talk ourselves out of this. This is scary. This is powerful. This is big. This is similar to other things we already do. Why can't we just do what we've done before? Why is this the new thing, and how long is it going to last, et cetera? Everybody in here has probably had versions of that conversation for various technology decisions. But for us, it came down to the three things you see there. And first and foremost for us was the philosophical fit between our company, our shop, and Palantir is this fearlessness about data. We all often talk ourselves out of things in terms of why we can't deliver this, why it's going to take too long, why it's prohibitive. And most of the reasoning for us comes back to the state of the data, the packaging of the data, the veracity of the data, et cetera, et cetera. So from our standpoint, that's always been a bit of a defensive shield. And if our colleagues in Houston are watching me today in the non-IT side, they're nodding their head or they're high-fiving. Yeah, you guys are always behind. You can't ever deliver what you want, et cetera. So, hi to all those folks. But Palantir brought, I would say, a refreshing fearlessness to that part of the discussion in working with our team. And that led to some very cautious, maybe trepidatious, but at least forward steps toward, yeah, we can do this. We can do it differently this time than we have in the past or than we do every day. So we really had to take a centering approach to this in terms of how are we going to go about it? Are we ready for this? So the technologies that we already have serve the purpose. They've been in place. They're stable. We have a mixture of things, as most people do, that have tried to plug particular gaps in what people are asking for and what really matters to the business. But technology aside, we've never been great about definition of objective, right? It's give me the pile of data and I'll get out of it what I want to get. It's give me all of it and I'll figure out which slice of it really matters. So we had a lot of really hard conversations about that walking in. And what I would say is it's crystallized into a much different approach organizationally from the board of directors on down as to the use case concept and how we treat that as a unit of work. Again, everybody says the words, but what does it mean? It means what data comes together for what purpose, and how committed are we to the outcome that represents. So for us, that's been a very painful process at times. I would say that, to paraphrase some of our leadership, sometimes we've felt in the past like we're looking for use cases as opposed to the inbound, the filtration, the refinement of those use cases happening because people trust our ability to deliver. So from an Apache standpoint, two things we did right out of the box. One was define a whole structure around interfacing with the business to get that use case definition structure, and we call it digital enablement. And we also took our data horsepower, if you will, the tools, the processes, the knowledge of the business, and we oriented that very specifically to say, this set of folks, this set of skills is going to be pointed at Foundry, and we're going to light it up. So with where we are today, we're starting to term Foundry as our analytics operating system. So if you ever did OS programming in your past, not many people are right at that level. You don't need to give that to everybody. You don't need to expect that it's universally maybe accessible or available, but you do need to have consistency there. And if you have a problem that comes in the door, it needs to go through a consistent set of processes and protocols. So from that standpoint, when problems come to us, or there is a situation in the business or a trend or a development, those now get judged against Foundry as the primary backdrop. I think we have other ways those can go, but we have that in the decision flow as part of something we've been learning and getting accustomed to over the last year. So we also decided initially to line this toward the operations side of our business. Operations in energy is complicated, it's dangerous, it's widely varied, it can be very tense and very performance driven, and there's lots of work to do in that space. So we took Foundry initially and we pointed it at that part of our business, and that's the use case development process that we put in place. So that starts, and those of you familiar with the energy space, especially upstream, we have these little factories called wells. We have these little factories all over the world. And in our case, we have several thousand of these little factories. And much like the example from Jacobs, every one of those is in a different state of its life. It has different tech. It might have come from a different origin. It might have been acquired or developed organically. It might be big, it might be small, but they're all out there. And they all have vital statistics, and they all have a part of the plan that they're supposed to deliver. So we're taking an approach called Well 360 that started with a subset of those. But the main idea is to bring the alerting and the actionable part of maintaining those wells and keeping them online and keeping them healthy, but to deliver that through Foundry as a form of consolidation and what I call noise reduction. So the folks in the field that operate these wells every day are inundated with alarms, alerts, buzzes, updates, requests, text messages. We're trying to bring that into a queue and into a set of capabilities that Foundry helps us deliver that applies the rules that need to be applied, but against the right data. And it doesn't require people who are supposed to be safely operating a well in West Texas to go gather data about what happened over the last 24 hours and why that temperature is spiking. So Well 360 was our first foray that has then moved into what we consider to be a more broad facility context. So our operations in Scotland, in the North Sea, are in some of the most difficult, most treacherous physical conditions on Earth. It's closer to the Arctic Circle than it is to the UK, if I quote some of our peers. But from the standpoint of what's out there, it is a very sophisticated industrial operation in the middle of the ocean. So how do you decide what to do and in what order and what impact that might have from a mechanical integrity standpoint, from a maintenance standpoint, from a safety standpoint. Well, you can't do it all out there. So what we're aligning Foundry with next, or we're in the middle of at this point, is taking all the data about those facilities and building more of a scenario modeling concept around those platforms, taking into account if I change this flow or this equipment or this process or this order, or if I take something offline, from a data-centric and a data-fed standpoint, how does that change my operation? And then save that back as a scenario and come back and develop an actual project plan from that. So take some of the risk out by simulation, but do it in a data-driven way. We're seeing a lot of excitement about that in the North Sea. So topic of every day and every discussion we have, and it's been for a long time, is back to that license to operate and being responsible as a company. So when you look at what is produced from our assets, from these wells, we also have to carefully measure and manage what is emitted from them. Everyday life, that's what we do, and we've done it for a long time. But from the standpoint of Foundry, we have developed and we've come to terms with the fact that, man, this is hard. It's a lot of data. It's from a lot of different places. And to ever see the whole picture, you've got to stitch together sometimes dozens, sometimes close to 100 different data sources and scenarios to bring it all together. And then you've got to do the calculations on it. And then you've got to QC that process. And it takes a long time. But we've shifted that from an occasional process, annual or biannual process, to being able to produce that same kind of information every day. Why? Because we've built enough data pipelines through Foundry, and we've had people accept the fact that, and this can really speed this process up, and the numbers match. So it's changing the conversation about what can you do about emissions, not at the end of the year, tomorrow. What equipment changes might that affect? What kinds of strategies or design principles can you apply to your wells going forward in your facilities? So many, many things we've come to realize, come to accept, but become very, we feel educated about over our first year with Foundry. So first, super proud of our team for the way they've approached this. And that goes from the development side all the way through to, like I said, our leadership team, because this is not in our character. This would not have been a typical thing for Apache to take on or to get executive level or top level support for. So very proud of everyone's ability to take that on and get out of our own way. Use that phrase a lot internally. Drop some of our traditional excuses, get past the hurdles of the past. Don't relive, missteps, stumbles, and so forth from prior attempts. But also, what nobody wants to hear, especially when the use case funnel starts to fill up and there's, wow, this is really cool, let's do these other things, is that you better be ready for some bad news. And that specifically is around the state and the readiness of your data that you're already depending on every day, and its value to these processes and these use cases. Those have been some very painful sit-downs, fundamental issues sometimes that go way, way back in the data value chain that are not easy to fix, but they're also not easy to overlook anymore. So from an Apache standpoint, there are multiple occasions way back to the control systems, way back to the wellhead, way back to the setup of our systems, that people say now, I get it. I get why that's important. I get why that naming convention has to be standardized. I get why I need to check and make sure this is flowed through and that I have all the data points. And that goes back to the field and the operations staff as well. So from our standpoint, it's not rainbows and unicorns, as some of our folks like to say, right? There's a lot of lumps. There's probably some scar tissue under my shirt here and under my colleagues' shirts as well. But as far as what we've accomplished in the first year, I do think it's forced a rapid maturation of the organization's appetite for data solutions, but also on the technical side, on the IT side, a very open mind about what we can do next. So from the standpoint of where we go, like I said, we have multiple years of use cases that are queued up. Now we just have to get approval for all the resources to go build them, which always an easy conversation in our shop. Not sure about yours. So thanks for the time, and look forward to talking to you later.